My father told the family business partner, "My son isn't ready for leadership." I accepted his decision without complaint. But when their biggest deal started falling apart, my phone lit up with their desperate messages. Let me set the scene. I'm 32, busted my ass through an MBA program while working full-time, spent 8 years learning construction management from the ground up, 4 of those at competing firms where nobody gave a damn about my last name. I have the credentials, the experience, and the fucking battle scars to prove I know what I'm doing. So when my father Stephen asked me to come back to the family business 2 years ago, I actually believed his bullshit about grooming me for leadership. I turned down a 6-figure offer with full benefits to come work for dear old dad at a 15% pay cut because family legacy or whatever. Biggest mistake of my fucking life. Last month, I walked into what I thought was a standard quarterly meeting with the partners. My presentation on risk mitigation for our new $40 million luxury development was ready to go. I'd spent weeks preparing it, analyzing every potential issue from supply chain disruptions to permit delays. This was my chance to show everyone I belonged at the table. Then my father cleared his throat before I could even open my laptop. He told everyone, Ryder, Justin, and the rest of the leadership team, that he had an announcement to make. The room went quiet as he explained that while I'd been doing adequate work, he'd decided I wasn't ready for a leadership position. Not now, possibly not for several years. He said this looking straight at me, with this patronizing smile that made my blood boil. I sat there, completely blindsided, while he talked about my lack of strategic vision and immaturity in client relations to people I'd been successfully working with for months. People who had literally complimented my work the week before. You know that moment when you're so fucking angry that you go completely calm? That's where I was. I didn't argue, didn't defend myself. I just nodded, closed my laptop, and sat through the rest of the 3-hour meeting taking notes like a good little employee. Later that afternoon, I found myself alone in the conference room, staring at the mock-ups for the Westlake Heights project, our biggest deal ever. $40 million, multiple buildings, retail spaces, luxury condos, a project that could make or break the company, a project that had my fingerprints all over the preliminary work, even though my father had conveniently forgotten to mention that fact. I spent the next week watching, observing, playing the dutiful son while documenting every single fuck-up my father made. And there were plenty. Missed emails, ignored warnings about zoning complications, dismissing concerns from the architectural team about foundation issues that I'd specifically flagged 3 months ago. Then I got the real story from Autumn in accounting. Over happy hour drinks, she let slip that my father had been systematically taking my proposals, stripping my name off them, and either claiming them as his own or burying them completely. Some team player, right? He wasn't protecting the company from my inexperience. He was protecting his ego from my competence. That night I made my decision. No dramatic confrontation. No family therapy bullshit. I wrote my resignation letter, scheduled it to hit everyone's inbox at 9 a.m., and cleared out my desk at 2 a.m. when nobody was around. By the time they realized I was gone, I'd already signed a lease on a small office space and filed paperwork for my own consulting firm. The first week of freedom was fucking glorious. I reached out to contacts I'd made over the years, had coffee with former clients, and started building something that was mine. No daddy dearest looking over my shoulder, moving the goalposts every time I got close to scoring. Then came the rumors. The Westlake Heights project was having issues. Contractors walking off-site, permit delays, cost overruns. Exactly the shit I'd warned about in my presentation, the one I never got to give. I watched from a distance, scanning industry news and chatting with former colleagues who were all too happy to share gossip about the clusterfuck unfolding. My father, apparently, was in way over his head but too proud to admit it. The partners were panicking. The client was threatening to pull out. And then, 3 weeks after I quit, my phone lit up at 11 p.m. with a text from Ryder. Brian, we need to talk about Westlake. Your father doesn't know I'm contacting you. This is urgent. I stared at that message for a full 5 minutes, a slow smile spreading across my face. Then another text, then another, then Justin, then Elizabeth from legal. All desperate, all behind my father's back, all essentially admitting that they needed the expertise they'd let my father dismiss. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened a beer, propped my feet up on my new desk, and scrolled through the increasingly panicked messages. The project that was supposed to establish my father's legacy was crumbling, and suddenly the son who wasn't ready was their only hope. You know what's funny about revenge? Sometimes you don't have to do a damn thing except step aside and watch someone drown in their own bullshit. I finally replied to Ryder at midnight with 2 words. I'm listening. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the comprehensive rescue plan I'd been developing since the day I walked out. A plan that would save their asses, but at a price that would make my father choke. My phone is still blowing up as I type this. The schadenfreude is so sweet I can barely stand it. Tomorrow, I'm meeting Ryder for breakfast to discuss options. But really, there's only one option now, and it's going to cost them. Update 1. All right, Reddit. You asked for an update, so grab your popcorn because the shit show just got a whole lot more interesting. That breakfast with Ryder? It lasted 3 fucking hours. He showed up looking like he hadn't slept in days. Wrinkled shirt, bloodshot eyes, constantly checking his phone. The man who once nodded along with my father's bullshit assessment of my abilities was now practically begging for my help. The Westlake Heights situation was even worse than I'd imagined. The foundation issues I'd flagged months ago, now they were looking at a 6-week delay and approximately $500,000 in additional costs. The zoning complications my father dismissed turned into a full-blown nightmare with the city council threatening to revoke permits. The material pricing I'd warned was volatile, skyrocketed exactly as I predicted, and my father's solution to all this, throwing money at problems while hiding the severity from both partners and clients. Classic Stephen Mitchell management style. Deny, deflect, and disaster. I sat there sipping my coffee, nodding occasionally, while Ryder word vomited all over the table. Inside, I was doing fucking cartwheels. Every disaster he described was literally bullet-pointed in my risk assessment presentation, the one I never got to give because Daddy Dearest needed to put me in my place. Ryder finally got to the point, around his 3rd espresso. They needed my expertise. They wanted to bring me back as a consultant. Would I consider it? I looked him dead in the eyes and hit him with the first demand. My consulting rate was $300 per hour, minimum 20 hours per week, 3-month guarantee. His expression was fucking priceless, like he'd just swallowed a lemon whole. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of immediately countering or calling my father, he just agreed. That's when I knew they were truly desperate. Over the next week, I had similar meetings with Justin and Elizabeth, each one revealing more layers of incompetence. The Westlake Heights project wasn't just at risk. It was heading for a spectacular, career-ending failure, the kind that makes local news and gets written up in industry blogs as a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, my father had called exactly once, left a voicemail that was peak Stephen, condescending, manipulative, offering me a chance to come back and learn from this situation. I saved that audio file like it was fucking gold. Evidence for later. I spent the weekend developing my comprehensive rescue plan, including alternate suppliers, revised timelines, renegotiation strategies for the permit, and technical solutions for the foundation issues. The plan was solid. It would work, but I wasn't about to hand it over without securing my pound of flesh. Monday morning, I met with all 3 partners, minus my father, at a neutral location. I laid everything out. What went wrong, why it went wrong, and most importantly, who ignored the warnings that could have prevented this clusterfuck. Justin tried defending my father at first, claiming he couldn't have known about some of these issues. That's when I pulled out my ace, forwarded emails showing my warnings from months ago, complete with my father's dismissive responses. The room went dead silent. Elizabeth actually whispered, "Jesus," under her breath. Then came my turn. I wasn't coming back as a consultant. If they wanted my rescue plan and my expertise, I wanted 3 things. 30% ownership stake COO position with clear succession planning, a public acknowledgement from my father about his mistakes and my contributions. Ryder started sweating. Justin looked like he might pass out. Elizabeth, ever the practical one, just asked for 24 hours to discuss it. They didn't need 24 hours. By dinner time, my phone was blowing up with texts from all three of them saying my father was refusing to even discuss my terms. Instead, he was claiming he could fix everything himself and that I was trying to extort the company during a crisis. That night, as I was meal prepping my sad bachelor dinner of chicken and rice, adulting is glamorous AF, I got a notification. The client for Westlake Heights had posted on LinkedIn about reconsidering partnerships due to concerning project delays. My father's nightmare scenario was playing out in real time, on social media, for all our industry connections to see. I screenshotted that post and sent it to all three partners with just 2 words, TikTok. The next morning, my father finally called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. I was sitting in my apartment watching my TV show, deliberately ignoring the man who had spent years ignoring my input. The power shift was intoxicating. When I finally took his call that afternoon, he started with his usual tactics, minimizing the problems, blaming external factors, suggesting that I was being opportunistic and childish. I let him ramble for exactly 2 minutes before interrupting. I told him I had a meeting with the Westlake Heights client scheduled for tomorrow morning, a meeting they had requested after hearing I was no longer with the company. I mentioned that I had no legal obligation to keep his incompetence private since I had documented every warning I'd given. Then I hung up. 20 seconds later, Ryder was calling me. Funny how that works. The meeting with all partners, including my stone-faced father, happened that evening at a local steakhouse. I arrived 15 minutes late on purpose, ordered the most expensive whiskey on the menu, and pulled out my tablet. For the next 45 minutes, I walked them through exactly what was happening with the Westlake project, what needed to be done to fix it, and why my father's approach had failed. I spoke with the confidence of someone who knew he held all the cards, because I fucking did. My father tried interrupting several times with his usual BS about how things are more complicated than they appear. Each time I pulled up an email, a report, or a projection I'd prepared months ago that perfectly predicted the current problems. His face got redder with each document I showed. Finally, we got to negotiation. They countered my 30% with 15. I didn't budge. They questioned the need for a COO title. I reminded them of the LinkedIn post and estimated the financial damage of losing the Westlake client. By dessert, which I ordered even though no one else did, petty? Yes. Satisfying? Absolutely. They had agreed to 25% ownership and the COO position, but my father was still balking at the public acknowledgement. That's when I pulled out my phone and showed them the draft of an email I'd prepared for the Westlake client, detailing all the warnings I'd given that were ignored. I wasn't bluffing. I absolutely would have sent it. My father finally spoke directly to me for the first time that evening. He suggested we take this conversation private, as father and son. I laughed right in his face. This wasn't about family anymore. This was business. And in business, as he'd spent years demonstrating, you don't get special treatment just because of blood. I stood up, tossed enough cash on the table to cover my meal and whiskey, and told them they had 24 hours to accept all my terms, or I'd be having a very candid conversation with the Westlake client and anyone else who would listen. As I walked out, I heard Elizabeth telling my father that they had no choice, that they were going to lose everything if they didn't bring me in, that maybe he should have listened to me from the beginning. My phone hasn't stopped buzzing since I got back to my apartment. Messages from all three partners, pleading with me to be reasonable. Nothing from my father yet. The deadline is noon tomorrow. I've already drafted my acceptance speech for when they cave, and believe me, it's not gracious. It's not forgiving. It's a declaration of a new era. For those keeping score at home, the son who wasn't ready for leadership is about to become the man who saved the company from his father's ego. And I'm going to make damn sure everyone knows it. I'll update tomorrow after the deadline. Something tells me Part 3 is going to be the most satisfying yet. Update 2. Well, Reddit. It's been a wild 3 weeks since my last update, and I'm typing this from what used to be my father's office. There's something deeply satisfying about sitting in his custom ergonomic chair, looking out the window he always bragged about. The view hits different when you've earned it by watching a man's ego implode in real time. The paperwork came through exactly 7 minutes before my deadline expired. I was sitting at my kitchen counter eating leftover Thai food when the email notification popped up on my laptop. Elizabeth had done the work herself. Smart woman, never trusted anyone else with the important shit. The agreement included all my demands, but my father had tried sneaking in a clause about performance review after 6 months that could potentially reduce my ownership percentage. Nice try, old man. I deleted that section, initialed the change, signed the rest, and sent it back with a note that they had 30 minutes to accept the modified terms or I'd be making some phone calls. The signed document came back in 22 minutes. No further changes. Day 1 back at the office was awkward as fuck. The staff had clearly been told I was returning in a leadership role, but nobody knew exactly what had happened. My father wasn't there. Client meeting, according to his assistant Cecilia, though her face said hiding from humiliation. I didn't have time to care. The Westlake Heights situation needed immediate attention. I spent that first day in back-to-back meetings with project managers, contractors, and the permit office. By 7 p.m., I had a clearer picture of the true disaster my father had created. It wasn't just bad planning, it was deliberate misrepresentation. He'd been falsifying progress reports, hiding cost overruns, and straight-up lying to partners about timelines. When I finally got home around 9, I found my laundry still sitting wet in the washing machine from that morning. Had to rewash the whole load because it had that gross mildew smell. Even when you're executing career revenge, real-life bullshit doesn't stop. Ordered DoorDash and fell asleep on the couch halfway through watching YouTube videos on my phone. Woke up at 3 a.m. with a crick in my neck and the delivery sitting untouched at my door. Glamorous revenge life, am I right? My father finally showed up the next day, walking into the partners' meeting 10 minutes late like nothing had changed. He sat in his usual seat at the head of the table, only to find everyone looking at me for direction at the other end. The confusion on his face lasted about 2 seconds before hardening into something between rage and disbelief. That meeting set the tone for everything that followed. I presented my rescue plan for Westlake Heights, the same one I'd outlined to the partners, but now with 2 weeks of implementation already underway. My father attempted to interject several times with concerns and suggestions that were basically attempts to undermine me or claim credit for parts of the plan. Each time I had receipts ready, emails, reports, documentation showing exactly when and how I developed these solutions, and how he'd previously rejected them. By the third interruption, Ryder was visibly cringing, and Justin was studying his coffee mug like it contained the secrets of the universe. The real kicker came when I announced I'd already met with the Westlake client and gotten them to withdraw their LinkedIn post and recommit to the project based on our new timeline. My father's face went through about 7 different emotions in 3 seconds, the last one being a forced smile as he attempted to congratulate our team on the accomplishment. I smiled right back and clarified that actually, I had handled the client meeting personally, as outlined in my contract. The silence in that conference room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Everyone knew what was happening. A public power transfer. One humiliating correction at a time. Over the next 2 weeks, I implemented my plan methodically, fixed the foundation issues, renegotiated with suppliers, streamlined the permit process. But that was just the visible work. Behind the scenes, I was building my case for what came next. I requested access to all financial records related to Westlake Heights, citing the need for a comprehensive audit to prevent future issues. Elizabeth backed me. She'd always been meticulous about risk management and was clearly pissed about being kept in the dark. What I found was worse than I expected. My father hadn't just been incompetent. He'd been using project funds to cover personal expenses. Not enough to be criminal, but definitely unethical and against company policy. Luxury golf weekends billed as client development. Expensive dinners with no business purpose. A pattern of financial sloppiness that bordered on deliberate mismanagement. I documented everything. Screenshots, spreadsheets, timelines, all while smiling through gritted teeth in meetings where my father tried to take credit for the project's improving status. The psychological warfare was subtle but constant. I'd correct him on small details in front of clients, ask for documentation he couldn't provide, reference meetings he hadn't attended. Each interaction chipped away at the image he'd built as the all-knowing founder. The man who had publicly humiliated me was getting it back tenfold, one paper cut at a time. Meanwhile, I was building relationships with the other partners. Not friendship. I wasn't there to make BFFs, but strategic alliances. Ryder was easy. He'd always been the practical one focused on bottom lines, and the numbers under my leadership were improving daily. Justin took longer. He and my father played golf together, but even he couldn't ignore the financial recovery happening under my watch. By week 3, the Westlake Heights project was back on the track. Contractors were on site. Permits were moving forward. The client was cautiously optimistic, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I scheduled the quarterly financial review meeting, typically my father's domain, and came prepared with a presentation that would leave no doubt about who should be running things. The morning of the meeting, I splurged on coffee and pastries for the whole office. Petty? Absolutely. Effective? You bet your ass. As everyone settled in, I noticed my father looked off. Rumpled shirt, dark circles under his eyes, the look of a man who knew what was coming and had spent the night trying to figure out how to stop it. Too little, too late, Daddy dearest. I started with the good news. Westlake Heights was now projected to complete on time with only an 8% cost overrun instead of the 23% disaster we'd been heading for. The partners actually applauded. My father joined in weakly, already trying to position himself to take partial credit. Then I transitioned to the lessons learned section. This was where I laid out, in excruciating detail, every misstep that had led to the crisis. Each bullet point on my PowerPoint was another nail in my father's professional coffin. I never said his name directly, didn't have to. Everyone knew who had been in charge. Everyone knew who had ignored warnings. Everyone knew who had created this mess. When I got to the financial audit findings, my father finally tried to shut it down, suggesting this level of detail wasn't necessary in a group setting. That's when Ryder, beautiful, practical Ryder, pointed out that transparency was exactly what they needed after weeks of crisis management. I showed them everything: the misallocated funds, the ignored warnings, the falsified progress reports. With each slide, my father seemed to physically shrink in his chair. By the time I finished, the partners weren't looking at him at all. They were looking at me, the son who had saved their biggest project while exposing years of mismanagement. The vote happened right there. Ryder proposed restructuring leadership roles to better reflect current contributions to company success. Elizabeth seconded it. Justin, after a long moment looking between me and my father, nodded his agreement. Just like that, my father was effectively demoted to senior consultant, while I assumed control of operations and project management. The same position he had publicly declared me unready for was now mine, handed to me by the very partners who had witnessed my humiliation. I expected to feel triumphant in that moment. Instead, I felt nothing, just a cold, practical satisfaction of a job efficiently done. My father didn't speak to me as he left the conference room, hasn't spoken to me directly since, actually. Communicates through emails and Cecilia when absolutely necessary. That was 2 days ago. Yesterday, I moved into his office, per the partner's suggestion, found a framed photo of us in his desk drawer, from when I graduated with my MBA. Weird to think that man was the same one who had tried to sabotage my career. I put the photo in the bottom drawer. Some things don't deserve display space. My mother called last night, trying to play peacemaker. Told me my father was hurt and confused about how things had escalated. I laughed into the phone, told her to ask him if he was still confused about whether I was ready for leadership. She hung up on me. Family dinner this Sunday should be interesting, if anyone shows up at all. This morning, the Westlake client sent an email thanking me personally for turning the project around. I forwarded it to all partners, making sure my father's address was included. Read receipts tell me he opened it, but never replied. So here I sit in his office, in his chair, looking out his window. The Westlake project will finish successfully. The company will survive and likely thrive under new leadership. I've already identified 3 other projects that need restructuring and have plans in motion. Is it everything I hoped for? TBA? Revenge tastes different than I expected. Not sweet, exactly. More like strong black coffee, bitter, clarifying, and exactly what was needed. For those wondering if there's a reconciliation chapter coming, don't hold your breath. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt after you burn them to the ground. Some lessons can only be taught through consequences. My father taught me that, ironically enough. The only thing left to do now is succeed so thoroughly that his mistake becomes the defining failure of his career. And I plan to do exactly that, one project at a time.